Good evening and welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. I'm your host, Kim B. Davis, and this evening we have one of our favorite guests with us. We have Dr. Angela Celeste May. We know her as our clinical, our organizational, and our forensically trained psychologist. She is also the president and co-founder of AMA and Associates Incorporated. She is the president and founder of Celeste Productions Incorporated. She is also an author and musician. And in 2023, she won the Distinguished Psychologist Award through an organization, MPAF. I will let Dr. Angie tell you what that means again. I forgot. But this evening, I'm so excited because we're going to be talking about listening to understand or listening to respond. Welcome to the show, Dr. Angie. How are you this evening?
I am doing fantastically great. Thank you. And always a pleasure to be here with you, Kim.
Thank you, Dr. Angie. I'm so happy to have you here. Listen, it is what, 6, 7 days away from the election. Oh,
Yes.
I'm just telling you, I cannot wait for the election to be over. I am nervous, but I am praying that America will vote correctly and that we will have our first woman president. Yes.
Yes.
Now, having said all of that, we are in the middle of campaign season. Every TV ad, every radio ad, newspapers, social media, everything is an attack ad. And to me, it seems like everyone sees something or posts something as a reaction to what they see. And it's not trying to understand why some people are fearful, others are hopeful, or people are like, we just want to be in the middle. We want to have lower taxes. We want to make sure that we all have jobs, that we have nice homes, that our country is secure, everyday kitchen table topics. Mm-hmm. So many people are arguing. If you mention immigrants, oh yes, those people are eating the cats and dogs, and they're taking our jobs away, and all these things. And I know I just had to add some hyperbole because that's what it feels like. But then on the flip side, if you listen to two people, they literally will just go back and forth. It's almost like a boxing match. And oftentimes, I'm like, well, where's the point? Where's the information to tell me why you feel immigration is bad or why you feel immigration is good? When you talk about education, it's similar. We don't want to spend money for this or we don't want to spend money for that, but it becomes very emotional in how people communicate. So, Dr. Angie, my question to you is it better to listen to respond, or is it better to listen to understand? And why and what is the difference?
Okay. Well, excellent question. As always, as usual.
Thank you.
This is one of those questions where you have the two-part, like answer, is it this or is it that? And my answer is yes. Yes, exactly. So it is better or best to do both. Listening will help you determine when and if and how to respond. So the second part of your question is informed by and based on what is the result of the first part. So if we're listening and truly listening, which means we really are leaning into what the person is saying, the trying to understand, that first part, we listen and try to understand. I would say that we don't always do this, but we should. I'm going to go ahead and say we should be listening to try to understand. If we listen to try to understand, we will not only get hopefully a better feel for what the person's perspective is, for what the other person is feeling, what the other person is thinking, a better idea of why they're upset or worried about, or whatever it may be, wherever their feelings lie, we get a better understanding of those things if we really listen. And then if we have a better understanding of it, then we'll know how to respond, or even if a response is needed. Sometimes we do this with our loved ones all the time. It seems to be easier to do with our loved ones than with those that we're necessarily boxing with over a point, although we box with loved ones as well over points. But if it's someone that you really care about or you're really invested in your life, someone you care about, your loved one, etc., we tend to more naturally want to lean in to understand where they're coming from, because we want them to be okay. We want our relationship to be okay. So why do we lean so hard into trying to understand? It's because we want to grow with the person. We want to move forward together. We want to heal whatever damage may be done in the relationship if the person is upset with you or whatever it may be. Because we're invested in that relationship, we're more likely to lean into listening so that we can really understand what's going on with that person and how they feel. Then, like I was saying, when we know how to respond. If it's just a matter of like you described, especially what's going on in our political climate here in the United States and in other places around the world where there's a really hot, heated political contest going on and back and forth. When we're interacting with those folks with whom we do not necessarily have an invested relationship, then it becomes easier to tune out and listen strictly, which is not really listening, but listen strictly to pick out those parts that we can like punch back on, or that we can make our own point with. And that's a more combative way of approaching the communication. And when we approach it in a strictly combative way like that, we tend to stay in our camps. Like it's harder to find middle ground between the two parties. So I would say yes. Yes, it's better to listen to understand so that we know whether to respond, how to respond, and all that. And then I would also add that if we truly believe that we're all in this together, in our case, and in any country, in any society where there is this struggle for moving forward politically or for getting rights for the people or whatever it may be, there's a society-wide kind of struggle. It's helpful to view it as we're all in this together, because whichever direction that particular country or the election or the outcomes of the leadership, whichever direction that goes, it's going to take everybody with them. They're all on that ship together. So it behooves everyone to treat it as though one does within family, or tends to do more so in family, and that is recognize that we're all in this together. Work on trying to care about your fellow woman and your fellow man, so that you do develop the desire and the habit to listen for the purpose of trying to understand each other. And then that opens up more communication with each other as well.
Excellent, Dr. Angie. That is great advice. So the last 10 to 15 years, it seems like our ability to really listen, to understand, and then to be able to respond in a manner that's respectful and where other people can understand where you're coming from, and it's not just so fiery and emotional, seems to have decreased over time. What do you attribute to people's emotional outburst? Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it frustration that people feel like they're not being heard? Because sometimes when I talk to people, I get the sense they don't feel like they've been heard. And so when you have someone who comes to say what you say quietly in the dark and you put it out, for everyone to see, it's like, oh, someone heard me. Someone's listening to me. I get to say this because it's the right thing to say, although it's not. But in that same vein, people get really, really angry. And what I notice is the more ludicrous a statement is, the angrier people get. No, that is absolutely true. The election was stolen. Okay. It wasn't stolen. Matter of fact, we just had a judge in New York that forced Rudy Giuliani to give up his personal property to two poll work to two
Everything,
yes, everything. His
everything.
everything that he
Penthouse,
has. Yes,
all
all
of
of
it.
that
Mm-hmm.
to these two election workers in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And people, but you still have people saying we have people that are voting illegally. And I'm like, no, we don't. The percentage of that is very, very small.
Very.
Secondly, the election has has worked every time we've had an election, except for this last time. We had a couple of hiccups, but thankfully some people, you know, had a conscience and did the right thing. But we've been the model of peaceful transition of power
Around the world, yes.
around the world
Mhm.
between presidents. So I go back to my first question, Dr. Angela, I'm sorry.
That's
What do you attribute to the increase in emotional instability when people are communicating? Is that just an increase in frustration, anger, or is it something else?
I would say it's a combination of things. As you were talking, as you were laying out the question, I was thinking about the internet. It's all the internet's fault. No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. But I think it's a combination of the direction that our culture has gone. Excuse me. The internet is part of that.
Mhm.
And as well as the anger, the frustration, and the worry, and those kinds of things. So the internet part, the part that it plays, I would say, is as we know, we've had those conversations, we've all had them with people about how it's easier to be to let the guardrails down when you're hiding behind a keyboard and you're anonymous, right? And so you can just let the id fly, just let it all fly, because you're hiding. And psychologists have found, doing research with people, that the tendency, we're always speaking in terms of tendencies, it's not every single person, but the tendency is to let I'm thinking about like our norms of decorum and politeness and how we treat each other. It can be a slippery slope. It can be easy to let some of those things kind of slide a little bit when you are in the anonymity, the hiding behind the keyboard and the screen. So because the internet is it's everywhere, it's so prevalent, does that mean every single person on the internet does that? No, of course not. But it has introduced into our society and into our societies across the world, more opportunity for that to happen. And so what happens is, even though you're doing it, maybe you're online and you may interact with people maybe in a more bold way than you do in your daily real, quote unquote, real life, or whatever the case may be. Um, as much as we might try to like pigeonhole that within, oh, that's just over here, it's still the same person. So those things spill out into the real life or into the life outside, the interactions with people outside of social media and internet communications and stuff. So I do feel like that social media, I say the internet, but social media in particular, of course,
Mhm.
it does have a part to play in making it more normalized to be disrespectful to people, because after all, they don't know where I live. They don't even know my real name because I'm going by, blah, blah, sugar pie, on the internet or whatever, whatever. I'm anonymous, right? So
Mhm.
the fact that you're anonymous, does that mean you're just going to be mean to everybody? Of course not. Of course not. But we have seen an uptick in that, that, people have found that anonymity does contribute to it for some people, or for a lot of people, not everyone, of course. So that's, I think, part of it that goes hand in hand with some of the changes in our societies and in our American society in particular, but not just us. So that's one part of it. Another part of it, definitely, like you were saying, there is an increase in the frustration and the emotionality, in terms of, we're all emotional beings, but the increase in worry and frustration, all
Mhm.
that is true. In our particular country, there's, such a polarity more and more, as we know, people are on different sides in terms of how they view things. But we also know, especially as two women, as two Black women, we also know that frustration this is not a new state. It's not a new state, but the ways that these things were handled were different because we had these norms of the way we were raised and how we treat each other and the respect that we were taught to give to other people and expect from other, each other. We were raised, that was a part and parcel of the way many of us were raised. So the frustration level, I there have been times when, it's always been very, very high, depending on the time in history for our people and for other people as well. But they handled it differently because there were those like norms in place that held fast. So I definitely think social media is part of it. It's not the cause or anything, of course. It's part of that. It has contributed to people not listening, people just, to your point, talking at each other, just letting stuff
Mm-hmm.
fly and talking at each other. I definitely think that we've become, in our particular society, we've become a more casual society in many ways. Not in every single way, not in every single pocket of our country, of course not, but yeah, less formal and therefore more permission to let some things fly. And then, of course, as you mentioned, 45, number 45. Now, I'm not going to say him whom shall not be named. I'm not going to
There,
say that.
there we go. There we go. Thank you.
But, yeah, but we will say, let's say, shall we say, the Republican nominee for the presidency at this time.
Yes.
Um, he most definitely in his previous position as quote unquote head of the free world, as the former occupier of the presidential suite in the White House, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
as Donald Trump has definitely been a key part of ushering in and
Mm-hmm.
normalizing this speech that is disrespectful, that is combative, and that requires little to no listening of other people. And so, like the way you were as you were describing it, it like made it more acceptable and kind of opened the doors, not kind of, it opened the doors for a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
who found that refreshing, who found that that gave them permission, like you were saying, oh well, if he's doing it and he's the leader, then you mean it's okay for me to do it, kind of thing. I
Right.
will say though that if someone's values, we have lots of different things that contribute to our behavior, our communication styles, our personalities, all that kind of stuff. So you can have two people who both may look at the president or the presidency, or with great respect, and find them as view them as their leader, leader of the country and all of that, who sets a tone. You could have two people who view that in the same way, but one of them, and then they may even have both been raised maybe with similar values, but for a variety of reasons, one of them may see that behavior of brashness and just plain disrespect, shall we call it that, just plain disrespect
Mm-hmm.
people, because he calls people names.
Yes.
Since we have the two, we can just state publicly available facts that
Mm-hmm.
are out there for public consumption.
Mm-hmm.
All of your listeners and watchers
Yes.
can see it for themselves. When people try to equalize our two top candidates, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and say, oh, they're both, just slinging mud and knocking at each other. When Vice President Kamala Harris, speaks of her opponent, Donald Trump,
Mm-hmm.
she speaks of his public record, and she quotes the
Exactly.
things that he has said publicly, that he has said in video, that he has said in recordings, that he
Mm-hmm.
has put in writing on his social media, all of those things. And they can come across as sounding insulting because they're pretty bad. Just plain awful. The put downs, the negativity, the insults, all those kinds of things. So she's reporting what he has said and done publicly,
Mm-hmm.
whereas he goes for those personal attacks that, as we know, when he entered the political arena in 2015 or so, leading up to the first, well, I'll just put my own opinion out there, first and only time that he will be up in there. He, that's when he really showed the public that a public figure could get away with this, and therefore, perhaps it's all right. But like I say, if you have two different people and they have two value systems, or they may have similar values, but one of them is really leaning into the values of respect and caring for each other and all of that, and the other person, they may have been raised with the similar values, but either their frustration is so high, or the way that they handle their emotions, that they find his rhetoric and his insulting nature refreshing instead of insulting. So I just want to say that, to say we can't just say, oh, it's because of the leader. The leader, by being in the position of leadership, has a lot of power, and so he's part of that equation. But individuals still have choice.
Yes.
Absolutely still have choice. So that whole anger and worry and all that comes to the fore, there's choice there as well. Even if you're feeling those feelings, it's about what we do with those feelings. That's a major part of any kind of therapy or counseling, or that people do. It's learning those healthier coping skills for dealing with those emotions and those issues that come up in life, trauma, whatever they may be. It's not to say that you can't have those feelings. It's what do we do with them? Do we attack our government buildings? Do we attack the government buildings? Or do we exercise our voice in a democratic way?
Correct.
So we have choices. We absolutely choice. So yeah, I would. It's often a combination of things, and in this case, I would say that as well. The leader's example, the level and ways in which people deal with their worry, their fear, their frustration, and just plain anger. Social media, that has been a contributing factor as well. And then something else you said also, when you were talking about, it's when you were talking about the anger part, particularly anger emotion. Oh, and feeling unheard. That's what you were saying.
Yes.
That's a real key part of it. Absolutely. For a big faction of our fellow American citizens. And we've seen it play out in other countries too, when people are feeling unheard for so long. And then they get someone who is rising in leadership, who seems to be speaking their language or speaking to them. It can become easier psychologically to, and we've seen it, right? Block out, make excuses for, dismiss blatantly unacceptable behavior. Now, why do I say unacceptable? Someone could say, well, that's just your opinion, Angela. That's fair. You can say, how am I going to tell people what's acceptable, what's not? But when I say acceptable or unacceptable, I'm referring to harm towards self and others, is what I'm referring to. So I may not agree with their opinion or viewpoint, etc. I don't mean unacceptable in terms of I disagree with it. I mean unacceptable in terms of they are, like you mentioned, the two poll workers earlier, Shay Moss and Ruby Moss, her mom. It's one thing to say that maybe they were citizens working on the election. They were not trying to influence anyone with their own politics one way or the other. We never knew if they were Democrat or Republican or independent. Right. They were just trying to be good citizens, helping with the election. But let's say that their politics or their values or views differed from some of the people that they were helping and aiding. They were not trying to push their views on anyone. They were just being good citizens and aiding in the election process. So when I say unacceptable, I'm referring to, perfect example, the fact that it's unacceptable that they have had their lives threatened, upended, reputation damaged, all of the pain and suffering that they've gone through simply because they were doing their citizen duty and giving up their time. So yeah,
that is an excellent point. And I thought about this as you were talking, because although sometimes we think of social media as being helpful, we know that sometimes there is a downside to it. But there's also a flip side that I don't think that when people when people are posting or they're not thinking about it. So there was a young man who was in Florida and he was walking through his neighborhood, and there was a white gentleman who decided to follow him and kept asking him, "Who are you? Do you live here? You need to tell us." Yeah. And so the kid is like, he is probably 18, 19 years old or 17. He's tall, for a Black kid. So we understand that sometimes people are threatened by that. We saw that with Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. And he's just walking and he's recording. And you have another guy who joins the first white guy. And then this white guy who initially stops him gets in his vehicle, pulls up next to him, and looks like he wants to pull out a weapon, and somebody stops him. I say all that to say because that first gentleman who started this, following this young man, and this young man is like, I don't have to tell you anything. I am minding my business. I haven't talked to you. The man kept saying, well, you upset my wife when you talked to her. He said, I never talked to your wife. I haven't said anything. And he was very calm because as you're watching this video as a mom, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this could be my child. And this young man is talking into the camera. He's like, this is crazy that I'm in here. And it was just a hurricane and everybody's power is out. So I'm getting some fresh air just to, get my mental space, my spirit together. The damage from, I think it was 2 or 3 hurricanes that came through in Florida in that particular area, Tampa, Orlando, I might be geographically. I know one is Tampa. They had a lot of damage. And so I say that to say that gentleman became a social media pariah because everybody began to post his picture. And then the next thing you know, people found out where he worked, and then his company promptly fired him. I just saw a video a couple of days ago where a man is driving and he has his wife in a car and his small child. He has a Harris Walt sign on his vehicle. I think he's driving a truck. So another truck drove up next to him with a young white kid in it, and he says some expletives, truck 2024, and pulls his finger up. And so the guy who has the Harris Wall sign on his truck, he's just driving. He's like, idiot. His wife is recording the whole scene. So the young kid, well, he looks like a young kid, but he probably isn't. He's a young man. Drives, makes some kind of turn, does a U-turn and comes back to say more things. Guess what? They have him on video, and now they're releasing his fiction. Everybody's like, let's make him famous. We have different people who have harassed people because they said, do you live here in this community? You can't swim in this pool. I remember there was a lady who was in some apartment community, and there was a guy who was swimming laps. And they said he does this every night. And she was like, he doesn't live here. And they said, but how do you know he doesn't live here? And why do you care? It turned out the gentleman did live there. But the fact of the matter was this woman, and again, they made her famous. We saw it with the African-American gentleman who was in New York at the park, who was taking pictures of birds. He was a bird watcher. He was an avid bird watcher. And this woman who had her dog, who was being irresponsible, he started recording her. They made her famous and made her lose her job.
Yeah.
There is a downside to when you display poor behavior. And I know, and I'm going to say this because this is my show, Kimberly Basher Davis, that there are some societal acceptable norms and respect, civility, being polite and kind. Those are expectations that everyone has of each other. If you cross somebody's path and you have to walk in front of them, most people will get upset if you don't say, excuse me. Rude. Right. Yes, they will say, rude. You didn't say, excuse me. Now that may start something, but most people will say that. Most people, when you walk into a room, want you to say good morning. And so for people like me who aren't morning people, when we walk into a room, I'm like, good morning, good morning, good morning. I'm like, okay, I did what I was supposed to do because it's acceptable societal norm. But we've gotten away from that, Dr. Angie. We have gotten away from it. And I had to talk about those two incidents because I saw that and I said, everything that you're talking about is correct. But now we're seeing, I would almost call it a course correction, where now the situation is turned around on the individuals who are behaving poorly.
Yes.
And and typically people will say, oh, they're having a mental episode. Talk about that a little bit. Because we've had this conversation before, and you said racism should potentially be classified as a mental health condition. However, it didn't meet am I saying this correctly? It didn't meet the criteria for the psychological standard.
Well, actually, it's not that it didn't meet the criteria, because I and many Black psychologists for sure, and I'm sure there are others, who would say that actually it does meet it. But what it didn't do is it didn't make it into the formal diagnostic code, the DSM. That's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And every formal clinical diagnosis that you hear about, from mild depression or anxiety all the way to the most severe of mental health challenges, cognitive disorders, dementia, any of those things, we use, meaning those of us in the mental health field, so that psychologists, counselors, social workers, psychiatrists, we all use that manual. That's how we base that's what we base our diagnosis in. So there were, I do remember that conversation. There were two Black psychologists, two gentlemen, I do believe. And they were really pushing for racism to get into the DSM, because it is based on, frankly, delusional thought. And by, the formal, the definition of delusion is having irrational, holding on to irrational thoughts, ideas and thoughts that not only have no basis in reality, but sometimes are counter to reality. So now I want to pause, it's just like put a comma there for a moment. We want to differentiate between having thoughts that don't have proof at this time. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are delusional. Because we can have beliefs about some things, there's no proof, and then maybe it happens all the time. Later down the line, it's like, oh my gosh, that person was right, or it really just at the time there was no proof. That's different than what we're talking about, the irrationality of we'll go by the lady with the dog. And I love that you named, so many of these incidents, because I agree that there's course correction going on. And this goes all the way back to, I don't know if it goes back to Trayvon, as far back as Trayvon Martin, but it's been a few years that we have seen some real consequences, because people, like you said, they're the community, and that's people of all different backgrounds coming together and saying, we don't agree with this. Why are you harassing this person, this Black man, this, and companies that are saying, this does not represent who we are. We don't want to see you, coming in here. I'm sorry they lost their job, but there are consequences to their behavior. So the idea that using that one last ones you mentioned with the bird watcher, the gentleman with the bird watcher. I mean, it was so outlandishly ridiculous. It was almost laughable. The man was watching birds. And now, frankly, as is the case in just about all of these, she's doing the harassing. She's the one doing the harassing. And so she's standing there saying, he's threatening me.
Right. So he's like, I'm just sitting here.
I'm just saying, so let's dissect how he was threatening her. He was being.
Yes. He is present. His present. Yes.
He is existing. How dare he exist in her space? So
exactly.
I don't know all, and that's a good thing, like research and look up. I don't know all the arguments at the time for why, this is quite a few, several years back, for why the authorities that be, felt that racism didn't quite fit in their minds, didn't quite fit the criteria. I would argue that perhaps with not the APA, which is the American Psychological Association, although I think they finally did, but the American Medical Association, as well as a few other major, very, very powerful organizations that are set up to oversee these professions, like the psychiatric profession for psychiatrists, et cetera. A couple of years ago, they put out formal apologies, which was huge. It was huge. Formal apologies to the public for their part in perpetuating the stereotypes and the negative racism about Black people in particular. This nonsense about Black folks' IQs are just not as high, and just all kind of bias written, in the weaved into the psychological test, just all kind. So over the years, our psychological tests and the different tools and things that we use have been consistently like tweaked and updated to try to get the bias out of them because of the multicultural. Back in my day, it was multicultural when I was coming through grad school, and that was my dissertation was about that as well, actually looking at multiculturalism, and which morphed into diversity and all that. Because we are having those kinds of conversations and have been having them, they've come much more to the forefront. I would argue that perhaps we might revisit the idea of looking at racism and having it put into the diagnostic code, because that racism, that prejudice is a mentality, and the discrimination, of course, are the behavioral practices that are based on this delusional idea that a Black man who is standing, like just breathing, is. But we also have to acknowledge that these thoughts and ideas don't come out of a vacuum.
Right.
When we acknowledge that we have in this country been free less time than we've been enslaved persons, that's a lot of that centuries of that ingrained idea that I own Black bodies. I, the white person, own Black bodies, and I have I should have control over Black bodies. And if I don't, then I feel threatened, and all of that's not based in any kind of like reality, because humans have never been property as far as I'm concerned, of course. But yeah, it didn't make it in. It might at some point, somebody might revisit that, but it is like you say, that I'm not trying to make social media the devil. It's got a lot of positives, like you said, which it does. It can open the door. It has expanded our global communities and conversations a lot, to the point that some of these things have been bolstered and strengthened in good ways, like you were talking about, where together communities are helping the police and helping each other with nabbing those who are harassing and making life difficult for innocent people. As well as the fact that it also can make it easier to get into those little dark web spaces and cuddle together, cuddle with and huddle together with your fellow, devilish who are trying to do wrong out here in these streets, in these internet streets. So it's like so many things, there's balance, there needs to be balance, and it's a tool like anything else. You got to be careful that we're not abusing it. It has been abused, and it's been used for good as well. But yeah, I love that you said it's a course correction. I think it is an excellent reminder to the broader society that, well, that there are still many, many people, and maybe even most people, who still want to treat each other with respect and care and love. And it's important to be reminded of that, so that as those frustrations build and as people are combating each other in their communications, that we are encouraged to hold on to the dignity and the respect of each other, so that we do start to listen and actually have a real communication where we listen to what the other person is saying. Sometimes you might change minds, sometimes you may not, but you don't have to do low blows where you go after the person, but rather go after the argument and still respect the person. So I think that in our country, again, your statement of course correction, I love that. Is I think, I don't think, I know we're being reminded to come back around to that. There are a lot of people in our lives, of course, who never left that. We do try to be respectful towards each other, but just in the overall sense of things, we've got some wonderful people in the public eye in who, in terms of leaders, and who set positive examples. And we have citizens who are setting positive examples. So it can remind us that we can have our arguments. We can be honest with each other with what we disagree with, but still respect each other. So very important.
That is a perfect way to end our conversation, Dr. Angie. Thank you so much for being with us. Before we
Absolutely.
get out of here, please tell us how we can reach you, how we can follow you on social media, and what you have coming up.
Well, thank you. As always, I am on social media, so you can find me on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, and I'm also on LinkedIn as well. I barely use my Twitter or whatever what's it called now? I don't know.
X.
That's how much I use
Yeah.
X. Yeah, I'm sort of on X. But all of those other platforms, it's Angela Celeste May or Dr. Angela Celeste May. On my Facebook page, I've got my Angela Celeste May, and then I've got the music page as well. That's Dr. Angela Celeste May. You can go to Reverb Nation as well to see. I've got to update that, put some new stuff on there, but it's got my 2 albums on there as well. You can find my company with my sister Michelle May at AMA Associates Facebook as well as Instagram also. And let's see, those are the best ways to reach me. Oh, in addition to Celeste, which is my middle name, Celeste, and then M as in music, US, and the number 1 at AOL.com. So you can reach out to me there if you're interested in booking me for anything like performances, etc., public speaking or whatever, particularly music. So that's ways to reach me. I just had my book, which
Yes.
I just had my book, which I moved. But my book, which is called Freedom. What is the I forgot the name of the book. It's called Freedom. What is the experience of living without negative self-imposed limitations? You can find that book with the lovely red cover on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com. You just type that in. You can find it on lots of different platforms. So that's my book. It's got 7 themes that can help all of us, common themes that can help us to get from feeling stuck to being free based on my research that I did with some wonderful people I interviewed. So that is that book. What I have coming up is at the Charles, if you're in the Detroit area on
Yes.
November 8th, yes, I will be at the Charles H. Wright Museum. It is a performance that I am doing with my brother's participating, so that's always cool when I can perform with family. But he is the drummer for it's a book release by Heather Buchanan, our friend Heather Buchanan. It is at the Charles H. Wright Museum in the Lewis Latimer Hall. It is from 6:30 to 8:30. It is a book release party. And then she wrote music for it. She and Tracy Cash wrote music for the book, so that it's like a little vignette snippets that are in support of the book. So the book is basically, it's a fictional tragic love story, but it's based in the true stories of Black people and African-American involvement in World War I. So very interesting. And she gave me a lovely compliment. And when she said that when she was writing the lead part, that female lead, that she thought of me and she had wanted me to perform it. So I was very honored, very honored. So that's coming up November 8th. And stay tuned for Violin Divas, because we are performing again for Noel night and later in December. If you're in the Detroit area. I will also say this: if you are in New York, I'll have to come back with this information, and you'll be able to see it later on my Facebook page. But we will be taking this performance to New York, and we are performing there as well in April.
Nice.
Yes,
Oh,
April next
wonderful.
year. Yeah, so there will be more stuff coming, but that's what I have in the short term. Thank
Well,
you.
congratulations. That
Thank
sounds
you.
amazing.
Thank you.
I
Very
am going
excited.
to try to make it on November 8th.
Yay,
gotta,
wonderful. Oh, it's free to the public. It is free.
yes,
Mhm.
yes. I gotta work my schedule out.
Yay.
But thank you, Dr. Angie. Every time you come on our show, you give us so much wonderful information. We can't wait till you join us again next month for another exciting topic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Kim B. Davis Show. You know me as your host, Kim B. Davis. You can find me everywhere on social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, or X, Instagram, Snapchat, LinkedIn, TikTok, everywhere on social media. And Kimberly Bachelor Davis. Bachelor is spelled Batchelor. You can see this show on youtube.com/Kimberly Bachelor Davis. You can hear this show on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, and Wisdom. You can learn more about me as an author at kimbdavis.com. And if you'd like to send me an email, send it to Kimberly@KimberlyBachelorDavis.com. And I will be very happy to respond to you. Thank you again for tuning in. I hope you'll join us on our next episode. And as always, remember, be magnificent.